Hi there. I was just going to point out before this started. I actually recorded this episode back in April, but because there were some audio issues and also because I got distracted with other projects, it took a while to get it out. But I hope that you will still enjoy it. There's still a little bit of audio futziness, but hopefully I have made it much more listenable. Thank you. Welcome to Conlanging, the podcast about constructed languages and the people who create them. I'm George Corley, and with me, where are you, Carl?
I'm in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, we have Carl Buck, who is the co-creator of Sangheili and someone who is known in the Conlanging community. Um, I brought you on mostly talking about Sangheili for the Halo series, which is on Paramount Plus, but also just generally about conlanging. I know that you are into like scripts and things
Yeah,
quite a bit.
writing systems has been one of my key interests in the conlanging pursuits that I've undertaken. But I do enjoy conlanging in general.
Yeah. Can you just at first introduce yourself and like how you got into conlanging?
Sure. As you mentioned, my name is Carl Buck. I currently live in Pennsylvania. Many years ago, when I was around 9 years old, I received a book on codes and ciphers. This may come as a surprise to some folks, but that was before the internet was really a thing. So I began to develop an interest in codes, ciphers, cryptography is the academic term. As I pursued this, I began to learn about Arabic and Chinese. I got a Chinese dictionary when I was just a couple years older, about 11 or so, and I became fascinated with the Hanzi, or the Chinese writing system, logograms, ideograms, etc. Um, with that interest, became a lifelong pursuit in understanding not just languages and linguistics, but how writing systems work, uh, mainly based on my fascination with Chinese. Um, and that led to several pursuits of languages on my own, as well as joining several online communities and exploring those interests through those.
Well, that's great. And how is it that you collaborated with David Peterson on this Sangheili language. How did you get involved with Halo?
Well, prior to 2019, I didn't really have any involvement. David was hired by the studio to produce the language. He wanted someone to collaborate with because his knowledge of Halo, as he put it, was minimal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he put out an announcement via Twitter, or the site formerly known as Twitter. Um, I I responded to that announcement. I showed him some of my work. We spoke on the phone once, and then a second time about a week later. And he had narrowed it down to three people by that time. He chose me, I think, primarily because of my military experience. I served in the Army from 1996 to 2002. I think the fact that I had that military experience is what one of the primary reasons he chose me, because Halo is a very militaristic game. It's, first person shooter kind of game, and I think he was looking for some of that insight into the language, to add some of that to the language, and we did during the process. We talked about certain warrior concepts or warrior culture that exists, and we implemented a lot of that into some of our the language creation.
Yeah. And that is a big part of the world building and like the scenarios of the game and the show. I don't know like how far into like political thing that like the political world building the game itself goes into, because I only played like a tiny bit of Halo when I was younger, but like watching the show through, the it's all about this war between humanity and the Covenant, which
Right,
is that yeah, and which you created the language for the Covenant, um,
right.
and like the humans have sort of fallen into sort of like a fascist dictatorship kind of thing, and then the Covenant are religious zealots with. It seems like it's multiple species
It
that
is.
take different combat roles. Yeah.
It is. And when we were first working on the development side, one of the questions that we took back to the studio was, are we making only one, or are we going to contribute any to the varied species? Because when you get into the lore of the games, there
Yeah.
are multiple species involved. And we were told pretty well, this is supposed to be sort of the Covenant's language, sort of a lingua franca for the Covenant. It doesn't belong necessarily to one species or another, as far as the show's concerned.
Yeah.
So it was more or less just give us one good language that we can use amongst the species, because the elites and then the council, they speak it. So yeah.
Was there a like a concern in the design process of like making sure this would be a language that all of these different species could speak? Because like physiologically, the elites and the prophets and the grunts, they're all pretty different, and also pretty different in how their mouth parts are structured
That is
visibly.
exactly, yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's an excellent question. So when we were when we were having the conversations with the studio, David took it upon himself to draw some pictures of the elite's mandibles and their facial structure. The physiological question was one of our primary questions. Um, and if you look at some of the grammar that we included, most especially the instrumentals, um, we focused on the elites because I don't know if you've been paying attention, but in the show, you actually see the elites speak it more than anyone else, save for maybe one of the council members when they're talking back and forth to Maki.
Yeah.
And if you really keep tabs, she's the one, the human is the one who speaks it the most out of everybody that speaks it on the show. Um, I think that's partly due to Charlie Murphy's skill, but also due to the writers and producers wanting to focus on her and her interaction with the company. I don't know. That's my guess based on watching the show. But no, the mandibles thing, we really took that into account. And if you look at the grammar, there's an aspect of certainty. And so we say they're using the upper mandible to do X verb. That means they're doing that verb with a level of
Mm-hmm.
certainty. If they're using their lower mandible to do X verb, then they're doing it with a certain level of uncertainty. And so we
Yeah.
did, we focused on the elites.
Okay. But you didn't really seem to be doing like too much like phonologically different. Was that anything concerning in terms of the different structures that the species have?
So the phonology and the initial sort of set of phonemes that we started to work with was based on the producer's preferences. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
David, David and I sat down and we made some nonce phrases. They didn't mean anything, but
Mm-hmm.
we made them with varying levels of alienness, I guess would be the term. The most alien being the hardest for a human to produce and not have to drink a glass of water right after. And then the least alien sounding almost like Japanese, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sounding
Mm-hmm.
like made up Japanese almost. I think there were like 5 or 6 different levels, maybe more. And then they chose one of those levels and said that's where we want it. And it was almost dead middle, dead center of those choices. And so the phonological choices were pretty much directed by the producers and showrunners based on the level of alienness that they wanted it to
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the sound. Let's actually hear it. And then also speaking of McKee, like our introduction of the language is her speak to the language is her speaking to one of the council members. You hear a little bit in the first battle of elites saying specific words, but it's like heavily modulated voices. But here you actually get a pretty significant conversation here.
Jamasikwaia.
Intan Adamuhashenkushi Trachu Tra Tiakoshen Kimamuspa.
Okay. So they're talking about um this artifact on this planet and what happened to it. And there's a few different, but you're right. This the actress playing McKee is actually very talented in the language, and you can I believe her backstory is like she was raised mostly she spent most of her life with the Covenant, right?
That's my understanding as well.
And so
And she's kind of half raised by them, but also very human. But I don't know,
yeah,
like
yeah,
some of the lore escapes me. I've watched the show, but it's kind of sometimes it's difficult to read between the lines. I think.
yeah. I don't want to like spoil too much about
Sure, no, I
stuff
get
that
it.
happens as you go into the show. It was interesting to see that, and also there is I noticed that apparently there's a word for Spartan, which if people don't know Halo, the Spartans are like super soldier space marines, and the main character of the game's Master Chief is one of the Spartans. He's been like genetically enhanced, and he wears power armor, and he's a giant dude who can handle giant weapons and stuff like that. But
Correct.
like they have a word for Spartan, and then they have a word that's being translated as demon. Is that like a derogatory term for Spartans, or is it specifically directed toward Master Chief, or what?
It. My understanding is when we made the word, we were. It was, if I remember correctly, the script just wanted us to refer to him as Demon, and
Mm,
it was initially directed at Master Chief individually. That word is Vashanko, and it
mm,
just means demon. And then the word that refers to humans is domo, and that is pretty important because it goes back to the game. So one of the requests when we were first developing this was to keep as much of the game conversation or lingo as we could. And so one of the interesting things is the verb to go. Um, in the game, you'll hear the elites chant "wort wort wort." So
mm.
we made the verb to go "waruta,"
Okay.
and so that when they're speaking quickly, it sounds like they're saying "wort." Waruta, waruta. Um,
Okay.
but it keeps with with the phonology that we created as well, without being too far outside the lines there. And then domo, we just made domo mean human, because that's in the game as well.
Okay. Yeah. Um, where did the Sangheili come from? Is that in the game, or are they just called Covenant in the game?
You know, I never actually played the game. My son did.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
son played multiple iterations of it. I can't really say. I think it comes from the game lore, but
Mm.
it's just Greek or Greek or Latin. It means blood son. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah, there's
Sanghelios. You know,
oh, okay. That's interesting. And I know that there are some like biblical references in the game and stuff that surround the covenant and stuff like that. One thing I noted while I was watching, and I want to know if like it factored into the design process at all, was that there are multiple human languages. In season one, we get significant Korean and Hungarian dialogue, and
Right. I
then
noticed
in
that
season
myself.
yeah, and then season two, there's a little bit of Spanish. Was there a conversation about like what human languages would be represented and trying to make sure that Sangheili would be different from those and distinguishable? Or
Um, I can't say that I was part of those conversations.
okay,
What I can say is whenever I reviewed a script, because one of the things that I was doing is I was taking the pieces of the script that belonged to us that we were supposed to translate and putting them together so that we would have a working document. I didn't see anything that was written out in Hungarian or Korean. My guess is what they did is they wrote the entire script in English, and then they would just point to the actor or actress that was supposed to speak those lines in
yeah,
those languages and say, "This is for you to speak in Korean or what have you."
yeah,
But again, I wasn't privy to that. I don't think it really reflects that much because none of the languages spoken have the adjectives. So
yeah, yeah. That's one thing is like you had adjectives in Sangheili, which definitely contrasted with you didn't end up having any human languages that have adjectives in there, but you
right.
know, the series might go on, so who knows.
No, you're right. No, the closest thing grammatically would be, I guess, the Hungarian, based on it being agglutinative,
Mhm.
much like Sangheili is with the verbal structure, because our verbs can get quite long. So I think that's probably the only comparative point I would say. Right?
Yeah, but it wasn't really a factor. It was
No,
just
not much.
you were just translating the Sangheili lines.
Correct.
um so they kind of selected what the phonology would be, and
Based on a set of parameters that David and I worked out, because the one of the guidelines they gave us is they wanted the overall structure of the words to be Japanese like.
interesting.
The sort of the open syllable situation with very few codas involved. And we, even though we included three codas in and us, we didn't utilize them that much.
Mm,
We kind of veered away from them because they wanted this open syllable type. And I think the I please don't quote me on this because I could be misremembering, but I think the original company that owned the game and developed the game was in fact a Japanese company,
oh,
and that's
okay.
one of that was one of the reasons behind it. Also, during my research, because I was tasked with researching a lot of the lore of the video games and some of the background behind where does Domo come from, where does Warwick come from, all that stuff. I found out, and this is very interesting, that in the original video games, I think the first two or first three, maybe the uh, the speaking that you hear from the elites is actually Japanese recorded, played backwards, and sped up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So a little bit of trivia for everybody on those games. The original language you hear is in fact Japanese, reversed and sped up, and so they kind of wanted us to sort of go that route. And so we gave them, like I told you a minute ago, the alienness factor increased, but with a sort of a Japanese structure involved.
Yeah, well, it definitely doesn't sound like Japanese anymore.
No, and part of that, part of that was a little bit of David and a little bit of me. Um, I don't think David would be. I don't think he would avoid answering this question. The process was a lot of go look at the script, see what we need to do, and then make us a bank of words to choose from that we can. If we don't have the definition yet, go make some words that fit the phonology that we might implement. for those meanings and those definitions. And so I wouldn't say I went out of my way to avoid the Japanese-ness, but I definitely made a point in some of the selections to veer away from the Japanese-ness, because when you put the words together and you make your sentences and you're making sure your syntax goes well together, you can kind of reverse engineer it and go back and maybe change one of the lexemes or morphemes so that it doesn't end up sounding exactly like Japanese.
Right. Um, so you are into scripts. I don't think I saw any Sangheili writing. Did you guys develop any writing?
So there is stuff in the game, and it's kind of an elementary system, and aesthetically it's pleasing, but I don't know that it really functions very well for the language we
Yeah.
created. In the early stages of our project and working on this, I did put together a proposal. David liked it. He made a secondary version that he thought would work well as a font, and we proposed it, and they sort of said thank you but no thank you, or we're going to leave it to the art department, which I'm sure you're aware is not uncommon on TV shows and movies. They leave the aesthetic design to the art team, which can make for a really pleasing movie or TV show, but doesn't necessarily speak to the stuff that you and I might be interested in. How does the writing system work, etc. Um,
Yeah.
my proposal is left on the cutting room floor, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, but I did. I went full fledged with it, and I had it all worked out. It was going to be sort of a Tibetan esque, the way the syllables fit together. It was going to
Yeah.
be Abagida, but if they chose not to go with it, that's fine.
I think this seems to be a common thing in like the movie conlangs, is that like sometimes they will ask somebody to make a script, or they will accept somebody's script that they made. And then but then a lot of times they just like send it to the art department, and the art department does like an alphabet cipher, and it just doesn't have the systematicity to it.
No, and I think some of it is budget. I think some of it is they're prioritizing the story over the aesthetics, and I think some of it, and this is just my opinion, is they're not sure how these things really work, and they don't think it matters, and that's fine. That's their choice. I think it would have been cool. I also like you, I've watched the show, and I don't know where they would have necessarily included it. So I kind of think it might have been a necessity thing in this case. It may have been, well, we don't really need it,
Yeah.
so we're not worried about it. Which again, that's their choice. But I was fully on board to do it. David and I both looked it over, and we thought about what level of effort would be involved, and I probably would have spent about a week or two on it, and then he could have turned it into a font in probably another week or two. But they wanted us to focus on the language, and that's what we did.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, it would it I think given I don't think I have that we have any shots of Sangheili writing anywhere, which I mean, they could have had a close up of an interface somewhere that they could have put it on, but I guess they just didn't worry about it.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it's a priority for them. I think this show is very much focused on the story and the action. Uh, the Sangheili that we've created thus far, I think, has added some depth to the story,
Mhm.
and I think that's what they were looking for.
Yeah. And it is an interesting story. It's got lots of interesting characters and lots of uh, you know, complicated political shenanigans going on. Um,
Yes, shenanigans, I think, is the most appropriate word.
uh, maybe a little bit stronger than shenanigans, but I won't get into all of the stuff, especially as you get into season 2. It gets a little crazy. But like it definitely fits in, and I think it was very important to have that with with uh, a human character being involved who was like partially raised by the Covenant, because there was a little bit of interplay of her speaking different languages. And there was like moments where like she was instrumental in deciphering things, and then there was also I really liked there was one moment in the show where they had um the Spartans start contributing to like deciphering Sangheili, because like a plot point in the first season is that they don't understand everything and they're trying to like learn more Sangheili in order to translate transmissions and things. And like apparently no one thought to ask the Spartans, because they're just weapons, right? They
Right.
aren't supposed to question anything. They're not supposed to know anything. They're conditioned and like chemically um, prevented from like having feelings and things. And also
Right.
they didn't think of them as intelligent, but they had the most contact with Covenant because apparently they never had any prisoners or anything. So like they were instrumental in some of the efforts to translate it. That was interesting. Um, let's pivot over and talk a little bit about your other like conlang work.
Sure.
Like what languages do you work on personally, and do you have any other commercial work that you've done?
Well, so my personal stuff, I'll go over that first. My primary project is one called Kala. It is a artistic language that I developed primarily as a means of exercising my writing system muscles. Um,
Uh,
uh, it's a pretty basic language. I'd say grammatically, it's very close to, it doesn't mirror exactly, but it's close to Korean in its grammatical structure. Phonologically, it's pretty close to Nahuatl. Uh,
uh-huh.
I used open syllable structure like Japanese, but I included some prenasals like Bantu languages do. Um, so, but I've created a multitude of systems for Kala, going back to one that I originally created for a different language in the early 2000s. And I've developed those systems as I've gone along with the language. Most recently, I published a PDF that describes a system called Omyaploko. Omyaploko is a logosyllabary. It includes
Mhm.
logograms, uh, ideograms, pictographs, as well as a complementing syllabary. Yep, there's the grammar for Kala. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and we will link to this. Um, this is on Fiat Lingua. Um, yeah.
so that's my main project. There's like I said, there's 4 or 5 different writing systems that I've created based on Kala. Um, Omia Floco, the latest one, is also my proudest one. Over 1,000 logograms, and again, the complementing syllabary to go with it. It's very fun to write with. It's also a great tool in trying to develop vocabulary and work on grammar skills, things like that. Um, it's just a lot of fun to utilize and to mess with and to update. Another project that I've worked on is something called Mal. Mal is a little different. Um, kind of sort of sourcing some of the vocabulary from Proto-Indo-European, but I'm trying to develop the grammar and some of the outlying morphological changes so that the language ends up sounding almost Semitic or Afroasiatic, um, even though I'm using Gai sort of roots and vocabulary. Um, I don't have a lot of other personal projects. I did recently start something called Hajimo, which is something sort of in honor of my daughter. It's a language for fairies. It's got
Mhm.
somewhat of a minimalistic phonology, but the grammar is what I'm prouder of because it's going to involve things like um, motional coverts. For
Mhm.
example, a fairy is going to be flying around. Are they eating while they're flying? If so, are they flying quickly? Are they flying slowly? Are they hovering? And those would be encoded in morphemes and in morphology. So those are just some side projects. I have done some other commercial work, nothing that's advertised because I get contacted sometimes by email or through Reddit, and folks will ask me to make them a writing system or to, put together a small vocabulary list. A couple of years ago, uh, uh, individual contacted me via Twitter and wanted me to make some symbols that they were going to use to represent the season.
Mhm.
Went back and forth with them for a little while because they were going to just do 4 seasons. I showed them that different cultures see seasons differently. Maybe I could
Yeah.
create you a couple more. And so I made those symbols for them. Small fee. I don't really like to advertise prices because those are always negotiable as far as I'm concerned. But if somebody wants me to, oh, got disconnected. There we go.
You're here. You're
Oh, I'm
here.
here. Okay, it says reconnect.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, but
Okay.
but I don't like to talk about prices because those are always negotiable as far as I'm concerned. But no, I'm open to any commercial work. I like working on projects. It's a lot of fun to sort of dig into not just the language aspect of it, but the cultural aspect of it. Why is this grammatical feature here?
Oh,
Why don't they use plosives, or why do they have 3 vowels versus 7? Those kinds of questions are very interesting to dig into. But no, my primary projects are Kala and Mal, because those are the ones that interest me the most. I do pay attention to the Language Creation Society job postings, and I will apply to those from time to time. But there's a few of them that I know some of my other Conlanging friends are probably better suited for, just based on the nature of the project or the job. So some of them I don't really apply for.
you were talking about like you enjoy delving into the culture as well as everything
Yes,
else.
because cultural aspects can very much inform how a language changes and how it evolves. I spoke about this both during my CopyCon presentation, uh, that was specifically about writing systems, but also during the latest language creation conference that was held via YouTube. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's one of the reasons why David preferred me for this position, for this particular project, because, like I said earlier in the interview, my military background and some of the verbs, some of the dialogue that we developed, that we needed to develop for the show, very much focused on military sort of tactics or military verbiage
Right.
that is used in the show. And I do think that my insight was valuable in those instances. Um, and some of the warrior mindset of
Yeah.
the elites, especially, came into play. Um, I can't
Were
think of
there
a good.
like
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm just asking like were there particular metaphors that they used that come from that or um
Well, we had an interview with the studio that they put out as a promotional video, where we discussed how to say hello,
yeah.
um, and it has to do with fighting. Fight well is their
Yeah,
greeting.
yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
It's not hello. So that kind of mindset, that kind of metaphorical thinking or dialogue is one of the things that we talked about. And instead of headquarters, they talk about a nest because the Sangheili, the elites, are lizard-like. So
Mhm.
lizards have a nest where they lay their eggs. So that kind of metaphorical thinking was applied throughout the dialogue that we created.
In terms of like the kind of dialogue you were talking about, so you're talking about like there's military style dialogue that you had to do.
Hmm.
Um, was are you talking about like commands, or are
So
you talking about like cases? Yeah.
so one of the verbs
Yeah.
that we made was to flank, which is a military term that has a lot to do with like movements across the battlefield, right? We talked about we have a verb that is to track someone or to sort of to track them down. Uh,
Yeah.
um, those are the kinds of verbs that we had to come up with. We came up with some nouns that were strictly military, like talking about the different types of weapons, talking about the different types of vehicles. And when we did that, we wanted to pull those in a natural way. So we kind of started with this sort of proto word in our head as far as like, where's it going to come from? But then we
Mhm.
developed it into a more specific term that similar to the way modern militaries use terms.
Yeah.
Good example: guys in the army today, even still, they call it a truck, and we're going to go get the truck shredded. Well, it's not really a truck. You know what I mean? Not in the strictest sense, right? So we we kind of looked at it from that perspective. When we talk about a rifle, uh, rifling is something that goes back to the early days of gunpowdered uh, weapons, but it
Yeah.
didn't always mean a rifle that you carry to shoot someone with. So you kind of have to take yourself back into that kind of thinking. Where did the modern military terms come from, and how do we want to develop those in this language for these people because of their culture, because of their physiology, as you pointed out earlier? Those are all questions that we had to
Yeah.
include in the process.
Yeah. And the technology, because
Yes,
like they don't have a rifle with a barrel that has the corkscrew grooves in it. They have
exactly.
plasma rifles and plasma swords and
Right,
the needler thingies that you have to figure out how those were made and what words would end up being used, right?
right. Another good example, not necessarily military lingo, but something that we developed from the culture mindset is the idea of an empty egg. Like I mentioned, they're sort of lizard-like creatures, and so to insult someone, you might call them an empty egg, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, those kinds of things. Um, to stomp on someone's nest, is kind of like I'm going to go mess them up, to keep
Uh-huh.
it family friendly, right? Um, but that's the kind of mindset we had to put ourselves in to develop a lot of the dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is super fun to get into like the mindset when you're doing something that's for something that's non-human. That's
Yes,
something that I'm thinking of a lot when I'm doing Ndakaga because it's dragons, right? And I have to
right,
think about like um okay, I have a word. I I'm I have these words and I know how human languages come up with these things, but I have to think about it from the point of view of a giant creature that can fly and has a breath weapon and is predatory and stuff. And it's like, yeah,
right.
yeah.
And like
um,
just coming off the top of my head, they have tails, which influence their balance and therefore their perspective. So
yeah.
like you take that into account, that can influence nouns. Like does that noun have a tail? It could be a noun classifier. You know what I mean? Those very interesting
You could
thought,
do,
thought experiments.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I have done a little bit of stuff with that, but yeah, but um, it is interesting. Does your military background affect your other conlanging? Obviously, it's going to be useful for the kind of world building that you need to do in Sangheili, but like, did you encounter other cultures in a way that informed your other conlanging or
So
things like
that's
that?
probably, yeah, so that's probably the best way to ask that question. So thank you. Um, so I was stationed in Germany for the entirety
Mm-hmm.
of my military time, but I was deployed to Croatia, a place, quite frankly, that I had not heard of before I got there because I
Uh-huh.
was very young and ill informed of the world. I also spent some time in Saudi Arabia. I then, as a contractor, don't worry about what that means, but as a civilian, not in the military, I went over to Qatar. So I've spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East, and I can say for sure that that has influenced my own work. Um, I learned as I don't know about as much Arabic as a person can learn in 2 years. Um, I had many Arabic speaking friends, folks that were from Jordan, Lebanon, um, Palestinians, Egyptians, um, even a few Iraqis. So I got the whole gambit of dialects across the Arabic speaking world. Um, that was very informative, both as someone interested in conlanging, but someone generally interested in languages and how they actually work rather than sort of the textbook stuff. I don't know if you took anything in high school, but I took Spanish in high school. And I know I've spoken to people from Mexico and Puerto Rico and Colombia and Venezuela. And the Spanish in those textbooks is not the Spanish that exists in the real world.
No,
Um,
no.
and being in the Middle East, again, like I said, it's very eye opening and it really informs one's perspective of how language actually works in the real world day to day between native speakers. Um, and so that part of it has really informed a lot of my own private conlanging, as well as some of the stuff that we did with Sangheili.
Yeah.
David is extremely intelligent when it comes to sound changes and developing vocabulary from a
Mm-hmm.
proto form to a modern form, as well as sort of the semantic space that a definition will exist in before it needs to change to a different thing. He was very good at that. And some of the stuff that I learned in the Middle East and everything, I sort of helped him with some of that too. Because, like, you might use a verb uh, differently between dialects. But in those dialects, individually within those different dialects, that verb is going to have a pretty narrow space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to just use a different word. But across the dialects, it might be really kind of weirdly different. And that's kind of what we had to keep in mind with Sangheili is do we need to make another word or can we just sort of use this word a little differently, right? Um, and his degree in linguistics and my experience over in the Middle East, I think, helped to inform how far we went or how close we stayed to those creations.
Um, that made me think a little bit because you were talking about dialects and such. Is that did you make any effort to make different dialects of Sangheili, especially since, like, I would kind of expect the elites and the grunts to talk a little differently than the council members, but I don't know.
No, I agree with you. I think that there would be some different pronunciation just based on their physiology alone, as you mentioned in the beginning here. Um,
Yeah, but also
we,
outlook. That
yeah, right.
yeah,
Um,
there's
uh,
yeah.
it wasn't something that we were tasked with. I think David probably would have been all for it had it been something that we were asked to do, but we weren't asked to do it. And similar to the writing system that I spoke of earlier, if it's not something they want us to do, I mean, okay, then we'll leave it to the side. I think that probably with a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, I think that either I could or David could pretty smoothly make a dialect or two. Um, but it's not something that we've been asked to do.
I actually I would ask though, like, how much how much did the religious aspect of the culture, how much did you take that into account in lots of metaphors and stuff? Because it's not subtle that the Covenant are religious fanatics and that is their motivation for pursuing the Halo. So
Right.
yeah.
So some of the writing that is in the scripts and in the shows, we would receive the scripts and I would go through it and see what parts that we were going to do. If it spoke in this sort of metaphorical way, or they were using analogies, or they're sort of speaking poetically or something like that, we would definitely take that into account. But it wasn't something that we drilled down on too closely. Um, if you listen to some of the council members when they speak, I don't want to say it's one for one as far as metaphorical thinking or metaphorical speaking, but it's pretty close to the way humans speak, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty close to the types of languages maybe an evangelical would use, or even maybe any extremist from a religious sect or divination or what have you. So we didn't really drill down too far on that stuff when we were looking at it. Some of it was, how do I put it? It was kind of bland. So all we needed to do was make the language sound good, I guess is probably the best way to say it.
That it is kind of generalized. It's not
Yes.
entirely clear what they worship, except that they want to that something in their religion makes them want to find the halo and use it to eliminate all other life forms. Basically, very unsubtle textbook evil cult
Right.
stuff, right?
It's sort of an apocalyptic cult, a little bit, I would say, a
Yeah.
dystopic kind of, apocalyptic thing. They want to blow everybody up. And like I said, the language is pretty straightforward, and not the Sangheili language. The way they speak about it in the scripts is pretty straightforward. It's not as metaphorical. But yeah, we did work on a couple things. I can't recall them right off the top of my head. We started this stuff back in 2019. Just a little bit of history there. 2019 summertime is when David reached out to me and decided to bring me on board this project. And because of COVID, we got the first script. I want to say it was mid to late 2020, but we didn't actually do a lot of the stuff until 21. And they kept pushing back the premiere date for the show, which, understandable. They had production delays. They had actors that were kind of doing other things in between, all that good stuff. So we didn't actually get down and dirty until probably 21, 22, somewhere in there, 2021, 2022. And then by 2023, it was ready to premiere, and here we go and everything. And now we're into the second season. I mean, it's been 5 years since we started. So some of the stuff from the early days, I can't even remember.
Yeah, I know. I know that there's certain things that stick out as things that they must have written into the script as religious language, like calling Master Chief a demon, and
Right.
also the word, I think it's hirajo, meaning blessed one.
Right. And so that's a good example, because you played that clip earlier where he refers to her as Hirajo. Um, that's probably a good one to explain. So we had the agentive or nominative for a person, right, to make the concept into a person, refer to an individual. And so we just took the verb to be holy, hira, and we just said, okay, hirajo. And those endings for the nominative person vary based on the phonology of the verb it's being attached to, as any natural language would. And so when they refer to her as Harajo, it's not her name, it's sort of her title. So that's probably the metaphorical thinking that they're doing there, referring to her as Holy One. And that's pretty cut and dry. Just put an affix on a verb. There you go. You got a new word.
And it's it's not really tied to like precisely what it means, maybe more of how they
Right.
see her, because like the term is referring to humans that have a certain special ability that I won't talk about it is.
Correct.
Yeah. So uh but yeah, that that's all like super interesting, and it is interesting to like talk to people who are on these projects about like how things came together. Um uh like one thing I will say is like I was watching, so I watched the first season when it came out on YouTube, and like it was very upfront with the Sangheili from the beginning, and like it was it was interesting getting into the second season and watching it, and like kept watching more episodes. I'm like, I haven't heard any Sangheili for a while. Until but later on it comes in, because like the first part is very much focusing on like the human side of the story, I guess. So
Right. And that's one of the things, that, because I'm the one that pulls the stuff from the script that we need to work on. That's one of the things I notice, excuse me, right away when we get sent the scripts is how much work each episode is going to require of David and I. And when I got the scripts for the first couple episodes of the second season, I messaged David and said, it looks like we can take a few weeks off. But then, as you noted, it kind of gets thick there towards the middle of the second
mhm.
season with the Sangheili dialogue. And I messaged him and I said, all that time off we had is gone now because this is gonna take us a couple of days. And sure enough, it did. Um, like we had it down to a science with the first season. We would have the script. I would pull the information, and once that was pulled, it would maybe take us an hour to 2 hours to really go through and punch out all the dialogue that we needed. And that was partly because I had done some work prior to those sessions of him and I sitting down, where I would, excuse me, develop some potential vocabulary based on the needs of the script. When it came to that second season and that towards the middle of the second season there, um, I was pretty well convinced. Yeah, we're going to need a couple of days. And we did. We needed, I think, 2 full days,
Yeah.
not full days, but 2 days, 2 sessions that were a little longer than normal to get all the way through. And that's the fun part, though, to me, right? When it's
Yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
you really got to dig deep and you really got to develop new words. Okay, is this going to work grammatically? Do we need a new ending here? Do we have the right kind of conjugation going on? Yeah, it can get kind of hairy.
I say this a lot, and I mentioned this on my stream because I was doing some translation. If you've done your work right on a conlang, translation should be hard. It should take effort to do it, because if you've done it right and it's not like meant to be close to English at all, then you're gonna have to like rewrite parts of it to make it make sense, right?
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with
Mhm.
that. And David and I, there were a couple of instances where we would be doing some dialogue and we'd have to go back and say, you know what? No, we have to, this one's, we got the right verb, but we conjugated it with the wrong ending, or we didn't put it in the interrogative or something to that effect, when it
Uh-huh.
should be based on the way
Yeah.
Sangheili works, not the way English works, right? And in
Right.
my own
Right.
work,
Right.
I've had to do that too. You go through and you practice and you try different phrases and you sort of um, exercise those grammatical muscles, if you will, and that's when you get better at it. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole process, and like you know, sometimes you might have to break things up or rearrange sentences and stuff, and get it, and or use different kinds of words than they used in the original, huh? But
Right.
anyway, that it's been really great talking to you. And I'm going to link to, you've got like several Fiat Lingua articles too, including a grammar and 2 different writing systems that I'll link to. And Halo, it's on Paramount Plus if you got Paramount Plus. Warning, it is military sci-fi, so it is fairly gory. And so
Yes. Well,
viewer
I very much
discretion
appreciate
advised. But
being on your show here, George.
yeah,
I watch every week. Not always live. Sometimes I have to watch it later after you've posted it, based on my own schedule.
yeah,
But it's a really good show, and I appreciate very much being on.
yeah. Well, thank you. And before you go, is there anything else you would like to say? Just any advice you'd like to give to all the conlangers out there?
Never stop learning.
Yeah,
If you have questions, ask people, ask folks like George, myself, David. If we can respond, we will, and we'll give you as much help as we can. That's the whole point of conlanging, is to learn and to
yeah,
develop your skills.
yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you, Carl, for coming on, um, and sharing with us a little bit about your work. And happy conlanging. Thank you so much for listening to or watching Conlangery. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And thank you especially to my patrons over on Patreon. You can go join them if you like. You can get early episodes and some special content for Tongues and Runes. But to thank all of them properly, Mintaka, Connor Stewart Rowe, Kenan Kigunda, Alex Russell Hayes, Jesse, Kay, Viren Patrick, Alexis Hugelman, Anthony Dosimo, Artifexian, Cassandra Woodhouse, Greca Grunk, Grammar Antifa, Eloivar Yana Mentuleum, Jack Keynes, Jake Penny, Miles Ronkovich, Nicholas Nordblad, Our Table, Paul Roser, Sigourney Hunter, Sylvia Sotomayor, and Wuming Shuai. Thank you. Conlangery's theme music is by Null Device. Conlangery is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license.